Good evening, everyone. On another cold, wet January 15th. It seems like every time we have a Martin Luther King program, it's raining. And if you were here last year, you might remember, I think it was like 20 below or something. I don't know, maybe we can export the weather like somebody's talking about exporting our water. I don't know, it's strange times. Well, anyway, my name is David Leslie, and I really want to welcome you to the Rothko Chapel. And it's really a great privilege to have you here this evening for our annual Martin Luther King Birthday Observance, which is particularly significant this year because if you look to the east, you might notice something is missing, which is the East Triptych that unfortunately was damaged from water leaks to Hurricane Beryl that came in July. This, by the way, is the first public program we've had in the chapel since the hurricane, so it's very special to, in a way, reopen again on this occasion. Just wanted to let you know the three paintings that were damaged, we look forward to having them back in the chapel because they're currently in the early stages of the restoration process. So we'll keep you posted. The chapel is open to the community on our regular schedule, so it's good to have that reopened, which we did right before the holidays. And just one little housekeeping note, if you don't mind silencing your cell phones, and if you would do that, be great. If you refrain from taking pictures or recording tonight's program, it will be posted on our website. It helps to create, I think, a more sacred and meaningful place as we deliberate together. Since its opening in 1971, the chapel's been an important pilgrimage destination, welcoming visitors from all over the world seeking respite and renewal within the walls of this transformative sanctuary. As you know, in addition to this space, complete with the art by Mark Rothko, inviting introspection and spiritual exploration, outside on the plaza stands Barnett Newman's broken obelisk dedicated to the living legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which constantly calls us to strengthen our commitments to further peace, equity, and social justice in our communities and beyond. In 1979, the chapel started the annual Martin Luther King Birthday Observance to connect the contemporary implications of Dr. King's legacy to the ongoing struggle for civil and human rights. Recent topics explored through this lecture series include the epidemic of gun violence in America, climate change and environmental racism, the role of nonviolent protest and resistance in social change movements, and the media's influence on the struggle for human rights. This year's MLK Birthday Observance, I believe, is important, titled Sick of War, Discussing Health Implications of U.S. Militarism. We're offering this program as part of a 2-year initiative here at the chapel focused on health justice and equity and delves into a critically important issue, the individual and communal impacts of the U.S. military-industrial complex and its associated wars and conflicts throughout the world. With the continued growth of this hundreds of billions of dollars sector and heightened level of saber rattling by recent and definitely incoming presidential administration, one often wonders how we can effectively address these realities. While some may argue that turning back the clock on the growth of the U.S. military sector is merely hope against hope, it's something unachievable. Fortunately, there are amongst us merchants of hope who are able both to dream big and also implement pragmatic strategies to ensure that this growth will not go unchallenged and that there will indeed be a time when war is practiced no more. These leaders are in the spirit of Dr. King, who reminds us that while there are times when King said, "We must accept finite disappointment," we must never, he continued, lose hope in infinite hope. For it's in this infinite hope that we find the insights and strength to deal with the finite issues of the day that really matter. One such person who puts these principles into practice is tonight's keynote speaker, David Vine. Former professor of anthropology at American University, David's research and writing probe deeply into the impact and cost of war, as captured in his recent book, The United States of War, A Global History of America's Endless Conflicts from Columbus to the Islamic State, which, by the way, was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in History. David is a board member of the Cost of War Project and co-founder of the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex. After David's opening remarks, there will be a panel discussion with other experts in the field whose vocations and life commitments are dedicated to addressing the individual and collective spiritual, physical, and psychological wounds of militarism and war. While you can read more about each of the presenters in the program, I want to extend a special welcome to Dr. Patrick Chakrabarty, Dr. Seema Jelani, and the Reverend Dr. Kelly Wadsworth. We really thank all of you for being with us here in Houston this evening. Thank you so much. I also want to take a moment to thank those who helped steward this very important place and care for it, including the chapel's board of directors, the underwriters, the donors, the volunteers, and my staff colleagues. Tonight, I especially want to lift up Kelly Johnson and Ana Martinez, who are our program leaders that ensure that public programs are developed and are made accessible to the public. It's simply one of those realities that without all these people in this village called the Rothko Chapel, we couldn't do what we do. So let's give them all a big round of applause. Thank you. And with that, and again, it's again my deep privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the Rothko Chapel this evening for the annual Martin Luther King Birthday Observance. And it's my privilege to invite David Vine to the podium.
The magic timepiece is missing. So someone wave, oh, there it is. It is magical. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, friends, for being here tonight, for choosing to be here, to engage with all of us in discussion when there are, of course, many other things you could be doing tonight. And at a time of great anxiety, sadness, and fear, from fires in LA to the ongoing slaughter in Gaza, to the uncertainty about what's to come after January 20th. Thank you for being here, because I have a strong suspicion that you feel the fierce urgency of now in this crucial moment of human history, as Dr. King put it in his iconic 1967 Beyond Vietnam speech. Before I speak about that speech and the topics that we're going to be addressing tonight, I do want to thank also David Leslie, Kelly Johnson, Ana Martinez, and all the staff here at the chapel, the AV staff, the janitorial staff, everyone who has made this event possible. Thank you also to my fellow panelists, who surely are more deserving of having the word keynote by their name than I am, people who've dedicated their lives to healing and saving others, to serving and supporting others, to tracing the links between racism, health, and empire, among many other things. I promise to do my best to even out the amount of time each of us will speak in the panel conversation to come. I also want to thank Dr. Isa Arreola, a fantastic Chamorro anthropologist and activist from the Northern Mariana Islands, with whom I wrote an article, "The Military-Industrial Complex is Killing Us All." And that's part of what led to my being here tonight and being lucky enough to be here tonight. While I had hoped Dr. Arreola would be able to be here as well, I want to be clear that I'm in no way speaking for her, although many of my words are inspired by Isa and our collaborative work with the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex, to which I also owe great thanks. Lastly, I want to thank the Chagosian people who were exiled from their homeland during the construction of the U.S. military base on Diego Garcia. They have made my career possible and changed my life. Now, especially as the white guy speaking at an MLK birthday event, I have to say I was tempted to just read Dr. King's Beyond Vietnam speech, which is sadly, terribly, as relevant, as analytically accurate, and as inspiring today as it was in 1967, when Dr. King rightly described the United States as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Whether you've read or listened to it or not, I urge you to read and or listen to it again. I do so on at least an annual basis and get more out of it each time. Ultimately, I decided that the organizers might be a little underwhelmed if I just read his speech coming all the way from California. So instead, let me ask all of you, who is sick of war among you? I'm glad to hear it. By sick of war, I didn't mean sick of war in the sense of sick by war or from war. All of us will be speaking in the moments to come and discussing how everyone in the United States has been made sick by war in a whole variety of ways. What I'm asking now, and I'm going to ask you one more time because I want to see commitment in this room. I'm asking who is sick of war in the sense of being sick and tired of the United States waging endless, continuous warfare since at least 2001, nearly a quarter century ago, and the start of the so-called War on Terror. Who is sick of war? Let me assure you, if you have any doubt, you are not alone. There is considerable evidence that people across this country and across the political spectrum are sick of war, and they've been sick of war for many, many years. And that's exactly what I heard when I went to Arizona for 3 weeks of election work prior to the November elections. There, I repeatedly heard Trump voters, as well as independents and Democrats, say things like, we're sick of endless wars, and we don't want World War III. So the question I want us to focus on tonight, above all, is what are we going to do about being sick of war? What are we going to do about being sick of war? I'll start by quickly outlining some of the catastrophic damage caused by our endless wars and some of the historical context behind these endless wars. Then I'll share some ideas I have for building an explicitly populist, transpartisan anti-war movement to take on the war profiteers and the military-industrial complex, and to build the country and the world that I know so many of you, so many of us want to see. A country and a world of health, of care, of equity, of justice. As Dr. King says in Beyond Vietnam, a world of an all-embracing and unconditional love for all humankind. Let me start by telling you a quick story about someone who was sick of war. On that Wednesday night in June, Peggy Madden Davitt heard the knock at the door that she dreaded for months. For a nanosecond, Peggy thought there might be good news about her son, Russell, who was a private in the Army deployed in Afghanistan. Then, realizing why the stranger was there, Peggy started saying, no, 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 No. She told the man he had the wrong house and slammed the door shut. He knocked again. No, you have the wrong house, Peggy said. The man knocked again. When Peggy finally opened the door, the man jammed his foot inside to deliver the news that Peggy's son, Private First Class Russell Madden, had been killed in Afghanistan. Russell was 29 years old. He died after a rocket-propelled grenade tore through his vehicle. He grew up in a town of less than 6,000. He loved sports and music. He married young. His wife had a baby boy. Peggy described how Russell was tall and could look intimidating at first, but had a boyish smile and soft eyes. That smile, Peggy told me, I miss that smile. As photographs and medical notes show, Russell died of severe injuries to his skull and brain. The bomb blast hit Russell's face and fractured his jaw and nasal bones. The explosion fractured Russell's skull and caused bruising and bleeding inside and around the brain. The blast cut a large gash into Russell's arm and broke both forearm bones. The bomb's impact fractured his left clavicle and caused bruising and bleeding around both lungs. I apologize for the explicit description of violence, but of course, we need to look, I think, very directly and carefully at the violence that our country has waged and the impacts it has inflicted. Russell and his family and friends are among the millions of victims of the wars the US government has been waging since the George W. Bush administration declared a so-called war on terror and began waging war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, and far beyond. Since 2001, the US military has fought continuously in what are now at least 27 countries. In that time, more than 15,000 US military personnel and military contractors have been killed. More than 30,000 military personnel and vets have committed suicide. Hundreds of thousands have returned from war with amputations, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, as survivors of rape and sexual assault, and suffering from countless other forms of physical and mental harm. Unfortunately, the toll, of course, is much, much higher. According to the Brown University Costs of War Project, the US government, US taxpayers, that is all of us, have spent or will ultimately spend $8 trillion on the post-2001 wars. That's $8 trillion with a T. $1 trillion is hard enough to comprehend. $8 trillion is incomprehensible. And that is an estimate as of 2 years ago, so we're likely up to about $9 to $10 trillion. Try for a moment, despite how incomprehensible those figures are, try to imagine what we could have done with just $8 trillion. Why did Russell Madden join the military only to die in Afghanistan, leaving behind a widow and a 6-year-old son without a father? He joined because he needed the health care for his son, who was born with cystic fibrosis, a disease requiring lifetime treatment. And joining the Army was the only way in our country that Russell could be sure his son would have health care for life. What could our government have done with $8 trillion to provide universal health care for families like Russell's? What could our government have done with $8 trillion to make college free, to end hunger in the US and worldwide, to prepare for pandemics, to combat global warming, climate change, and the kind of effects we're seeing now in LA, and the kinds of global warming fueled hurricanes that hit places like Houston and this chapel and other parts of the United States? How many more have died because of what the US government did not do with $8 trillion. President Dwight Eisenhower likely would have called the $8 trillion a theft. As the former five-star general said, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. But theft really isn't a strong enough word. When considering that $8 trillion squandered, stolen from humanity in a certain sense, words like horror and atrocity seem more appropriate. The horror, the atrocity expand when one considers that the suffering of US military personnel and their family and friends is just a small, small fraction of the suffering inflicted by the post-2001 wars. Try for a moment to imagine 4.5 million Russell Maddens. According to the best estimate available, again from the Costs of War Project, more than 4.5 million people, mostly civilians, have died in just the US wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria. Tens of millions have surely been injured and traumatized. 38 million people have been displaced in the most violent wars the US military has been involved in. Imagine everyone in Texas and Virginia combined displaced from their homes. Entire neighborhoods, cities, and societies have been shattered. The US government and the United States, to be clear, are not solely responsible for all this death and destruction. Many other governments, leaders, and fighting forces are too. But the US government is disproportionately, far and away disproportionately responsible, especially for the wars it chose to wage in Afghanistan, Iraq, and now in backing the Israeli government's genocidal war in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and Iran. Thus, we must add to those prior totals those killed by US armed Israeli forces. At least 45,000, and quite possibly around 200,000 or more, have been killed in Gaza alone. Hundreds of thousands have been injured, millions have been displaced, some as many as 10 times or more. The total effects of the post-2001 wars have been so disastrous that words can't capture the calamity, the catastrophe, the horror. Numbers certainly can tell us only so much. Quickly, numbers like 4.5 million become numbing. Which is why I think it's, again, helpful to focus on one person, one life, one Afghan Russell Madden. The Irish poet Padraig O'Tuama writes, "When I was a child, I learnt to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But these days, I've been counting lives. So I count 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, because each time is the first time that that life has been taken." Coincidentally, that poem gets to me clearly, and the subject gets to me as I think it probably should. Coincidentally, perhaps, the death toll in the post-2001 wars, 4.5 million, reaches the same magnitude as the death toll in the war that Dr. King was trying to end in 1967, a year before he was assassinated, Vietnam. An estimated 4 to 5 million were killed there, with hundreds of thousands more killed in Laos and Cambodia. Although if you think of it in this way, the post-2001 wars have been our generation's Vietnam. Some like me have thought that the period of endless wars since 2001 is exceptional. To the contrary, endless war is the norm in US history, as I try to show in my book, The United States of War. According to the Congressional Research Service and others, the US military has waged war and engaged in some form of combat in all but 11 years in US history. By some measures, the United States has never been at peace. Critically, US forces initiated most of these wars. Almost all were aggressive offensive wars of choice, like the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Japanese attack on US colonies in the Pacific was an exception in US history. Since independence, the US military has fought in or against around 140 countries and peoples. Just a few include Britain, Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, Muskogee Creek, Canada, Seminole, Cherokee, Kiowa, Comanche, Cheyenne, Apache, Sioux, Ute, Samoa, China, Haiti, Russia, Mexico, Cuba, the Philippines, Honduras, Panama, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Gaza. And that's just a small sample. As the title of my book says, the United States is, at least to this point in its history, a United States of war. And I mean that title quite literally. The United States has been, since independence, a United States of war, a country profoundly shaped and in many ways defined by war and preparations for war, including, it must be said, multiple genocidal wars from the 19th century to today. The lives of all of us living in the United States and the lives of all too many around the world have been shaped by a permanent war system that has largely benefited corporations and other elites and inflicted the worst possible costs on millions upon millions. Let me be clear. It does not have to be this way. There was nothing inevitable about the United States becoming a United States of war. And there is nothing inevitable or predestined about the United States continuing to be a United States of war. Indeed, I wrote the book and have dedicated much of my life to working with others to urgently transform the United States into a United States of peace. I wrote the book not to depress people, and I'm speaking tonight not to depress you, but instead to help us better diagnose why the United States is a United States of war, and thus how we can build solutions and movements to transform the country into a United States of peace. I don't have time to offer my book's full explanation for why the United States is a United States of war. But in short, the answer has to do with powerful US leaders, mostly wealthy, white, male leaders, repeatedly choosing war and constructing an infrastructure of war, driven by capitalist, profit-making desires, the military-industrial complex, politicians' political interests, and the forces of racism, nationalism, imperialism, militarized masculinity, and missionary Christianity. Unfortunately, before I turn to how we're going to do something about this, I have to warn folks, it could get much worse, and we have to be very aware of that potential. We're now in a moment of unprecedented existential danger for the United States and the world, and am not saying that because Donald Trump is coming into office. I would have said the exact same thing if Kamala Harris were coming into office. We're in a moment of unprecedented danger because a relatively small group, the magic clock doesn't lie. We're in a moment of unprecedented danger because a relatively small group of war profiteers is leading the country and the world down a path toward what could easily bring even greater catastrophic destruction than we've seen since 2001. They're leading us toward war with China, or Russia, or both, toward World War III, which is a war that all too easily could become a nuclear war that could kill some 4 to 5 billion people, that's billion with a B, and endanger all life on Earth. And that's why I've been working for the last almost 3 years with a diverse group of activists, academics, advocates, veterans, and others to develop new effective strategies to dismantle the economic and political foundations of the permanent war system. That is the military-industrial complex, which is playing a leading role in leading us toward a third world war. Together, members of the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex have concluded that to save ourselves from this fate and to redirect huge amounts of the world's money, energy, and resources toward solving our most pressing problems, we must develop new strategies to take on, weaken, and free ourselves from the war profiteers. Many in the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex are hopeful in this moment, actually, because amid today's unprecedented danger, we're also in a moment of unprecedented global uprising against war, beginning with opposition to the US-backed Israeli genocide in Palestine. So the question becomes, how are we going to seize this moment to end the genocide and build a larger movement to end endless war and free humanity from the war profiteers and the path to World War III, to build a world of real safety and security for all? I clearly don't have all the answers, and I also don't have time to, even if I did, to explain them because of the magic clock. So I want to conclude by sharing one of the ideas from the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex and others, which again is the idea of building a transpartisan, populist anti-war movement. I can say more about this perhaps later, but in short, this would be a global populist anti-war movement that would insist, as Dr. King said, that war is not the answer. It would be a movement that would be a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all humankind. It would take on the war profiteers. It would demand international treaties and arms reduction efforts, just as the anti-nuclear movement did in the 1980s. Ultimately, it would be a cross-national movement of movements, linking the struggle against war with a struggle for universal health care, with the struggle against global warming, climate change, with a struggle for labor rights, for racial justice, gender equality, and many other movements. We still have a choice today, Dr. King reminds us: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace and justice throughout the world, he continues. Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we tell others the struggle is too hard, he says? Or will there be another message of longing, of hope, of solidarity? The choice is ours. And though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this crucial moment of human history. We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today, Dr. King says. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. Thank you.
Should we start? Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Pratik Chakraborty. I teach at the University of Houston. Before we start the discussion, I would like to let you know that we have some cards for the audience. If you have any questions for the panel, mostly for Dr. David Vine or the others as well, please write them down. I think Kelly Johnson, she will be circulating those cards, so if you have any questions for the panel, just let them to her. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, David. Can I call you David? Dr. David Vine. After that mesmerizing talk, I do not know where to start. And I thought I'll start where everybody else has started, is by talking about the significance of the moment. And this moment seems important for various reasons. Because as this book, The United States of War, do you have a copy here? It's a fascinating book. Says that it's a war outside and it's also a war inside. And that is the critical moment to realize that it is not a war happening miles and thousands of miles away. It's a war that is happening in our lives, and everybody is sick of that war. And one of those significant moments that I wanted to highlight is that this is the occasion of the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And we know that Dr. Martin Luther King was staunchly against the war and the Vietnam War, but what he also was greatly in favor of was universal health care. And that is often not talked about as much. And under his leadership, during the civil rights movement, there's a huge group of African American doctors, nurses, and individuals who fought for the universal health care. So what you have there is, and they were critical in desegregating hospitals, in the Medicare movement, and what you have is a dual defeat of that vision of universal health care, but also the vision of a world full of peace. So that connection is important to us now as we live through this horrendous moment in time in terms of war, but also in terms of healthcare. So that is the important connection that I wanted to start with. One of the many points that David's talk and the paper that he wrote with Isla Ariola is a fascinating paper. It's a short paper, and I would encourage everybody to read. I would actually encourage everybody to buy the book as well. But it is talking about the military complex, industrial complex, is killing us all. And I wanted to start the discussion with my co-panelists on the significance of this meaning of it's killing us all. And as I say, the healthcare that we have in this country, the war that is lodged everywhere, there's a lot of different reasons of why we are dying a little every day. And I wanted to start with Dr. Seema Jilani on that point of what that phrase means to you, as it is killing us all. And you are you are the brave one who has served in the military zones and the camps in Gaza, West Bank, Afghanistan. And you also have strong personal connections to those regions. So we are privileged to have you here to listen from you about the meaning of this phrase for you. It's killing us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to start by saying that I speak here in a personal capacity and not behalf of any organization, and that I invite you in a pause to understand why in this moment I have to say that. Because our institutions have failed us, because we are living in a state of fear, because academicians, the media, legacy media, because in order to speak in these spaces, you have to rise your neck above everyone else. And I'm so grateful that a space has been created to shift that narrative, because it is not an easy thing to do so. So how is it killing us here? It's killing us because our institutions have failed as liberal, so-called liberal bastions of rules, a rule-based society. How is it killing my patients that I have seen in Afghanistan, children left orphaned? I could talk to you about the 1-year-old in the first half hour of a Gaza emergency room, and I've been in and out of Gaza and the West Bank for over 20 years, about how his right arm and right leg were hanging by a thread of tissue and were cut off without anesthesia, and he was unable to go to the operating room because there were so many other mass casualties and pressing cases. I could talk to you about the children playing in Ukraine bomb shelters and about how identifying bones in the mass graves of the Bosnian genocide killed a part of me when I had to tell a mother that her son's bones had been found scattered intentionally across multiple mass graves. And so what I think in the cultural shock in coming back and living in the United States, which I have done most recently, what I notice is a numbness, is a malaise within each of us, the commodification of violence where we're able to scroll through a screen. So we don't have to see what I saw, the 11-year-old girl so charred and burnt that the smell of her flesh singed my nose and remains with me. And we don't have to see that because we can flip through to the advertisement for the newest shoe. And so that is a disease that is ailing every single one, myself included, here. And I invite us to interrogate ourselves in that. The other disease is, and I don't accept the label of hero, the people, I got to come back. I'm here sitting with you today. What a privilege. Most of the people that are in Gaza or elsewhere, Yemen, do not have that are in refugee camps that I've worked in Lebanon, in Shatila, and so on, are now fourth or fifth generation refugees. So I will say that I am of privilege to be sitting here with you. And so the other way it's killing us, for me personally, is having come out, imagine a week, I have been in Gaza, our bullet went through the ICU of our hospital. It was closed in by Israeli authorities. And suddenly we were unable to return to work. It was evacuated. So what does that mean? It means the normalization of how we used to talk about the fall of Saigon, the fall of Mosul. We have now we're talking about the fall of hospitals. That's normal. Kamal Adwan, Nasser Hospital, Al-Shifa. That is how we have marked this particular war. What does that mean in terms of killing a society that we have now normalized the dismantling of the healthcare infrastructure and civilian population? So, and the last part that I'll say is I was privileged to meet with the UN Security Council and brief them shortly after Gaza, meet with Senate Armed Forces Committee. No one can say that they didn't know. Whether it's Bosnia or elsewhere, or Afghanistan. And I can't sit on this stage and not mention that in a private briefing of the UN Security Council that I was filled with diplomats, staffers, MSF, UN, OCHA, every other acronym. I was the only woman of color in that room. That killed something in me, and at the same time I called my father, who himself was a boat refugee, who, thank you, who my parents consistently ask why I keep going back to the places that they risked their life to leave and make a better place, because people like us deserve to sit in those rooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those views. Can I ask you a slightly more question of detail about your views of the situations that you've seen in as a doctor? What are the most important medical situations or crisis points that you saw and that needs to be addressed in particular?
The targeting of healthcare workers in particular has been a massive shift in the rules of engagement, whether that's in Ukraine and Mariupol or elsewhere, as I demonstrated here. I've also worked on refugee rescue boats in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The criminalization of humanitarian aid, so our boat was shot at, funded by the EU, who trained the Libyan militia to do so that those refugees don't arrive onto Italian soil. That is how when we talk about the military-industrial complex that you, David, had mentioned, how far-fetched the tentacles go. That it's gone all the way to Italy training Libyan militias to shoot at aid workers so that we don't bring those refugees onto their land. And so in terms of Gaza, it's extraordinary burn. I've been in so many conflicts, and I will say the magnitude, the proportionality of children I have never seen as I have in Gaza. So at one point we were doing what's called a code and coding, and 5 in our resuscitation room, and of those 4 were under the age of 14. So the magnitude that children and the birthing of a generation of orphans is something that we're now seeing as regular part of warfare.
Yes, and I was doing some research, not for this, but I realized that one of the striking facts of the mortalities in Gaza and Ukraine, if you compare the two horrendous conflicts taking place, is in Gaza, the civilian deaths outnumber the military deaths, while in Ukraine, the military deaths outnumber the civilian deaths. So that's
correct.
important.
And I also want to, we often focus on women and children, rightfully so, and as a pediatrician, I would also endorse that. But what does it mean for a place, for instance, like Bosnia, where they lost a generation of young boys and men? Or is it okay, are we sanctioning the killing of innocent young men and boys, as in the example that you mentioned with our veterans as well, to turn to that. So just wanting to, the disease that is inflicted upon a society without the whole family structure of some sort, without the community, is laid bare, and that fabric is destroyed. And quickly, I'll just do one thing because I know I want to turn to you. When we did have a patient and we didn't have any ketamine or pain medicine in Gaza, we ran out of it, and there was no death with dignity on the floor of a Gaza emergency room. It was a simple suture, and I was trying to distract a young boy, 7 years old. And what we would do here, maybe as a method of distraction, is ask, what's your favorite food? He probably hadn't eaten in some time. What's your favorite subject at school? They haven't had school in months. Who's your best friend? These are all landmines of questions that you cannot ask, and I say that because it is emblematic of the very fabric of the society that has been dismantled.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now turn to Reverend Dr. Kelly Wordsworth, and we are privileged to have you here as well. And we want to learn from you, at least I want to learn from you, this phrase that it's killing us all, what it means to you. Because you have served as a veteran in the Middle East, and as a pastor you speak to families, military families, communities who are suffering in various ways. So what does that phrase remind you of? It's killing us all.
Thank you. Good evening. It's so nice to be here after sitting in the front for David's talk. It's nice to be up here and see this great and terrific audience, packed full. My name is Kelly Wadsworth, and I come from Salem, Oregon, so greetings from the Pacific Northwest. Thank you for having some rain. I felt right at home all day today. And I first want to know, are there any folks here this evening who are military veterans? Do we have any military veterans? There's one back there. Terrific. So I served in the U.S. Army from 2001 until 2011. All three, I served in the Army, Reserves, Guard, and active duty. I deployed to Iraq from 2008 to 2009. I served as a battalion chaplain, and I'm the one up here who didn't have all these great ideas at the beginning. I thought serving in the military sounded like a good adventure. It was only afterwards that I came to see the enormous amounts of problems that it is not just causing on other sides of the world, but here at home. Some of our very best scholars have sounded the alarm bell that what happens on the edge of the empire will eventually come home to roost. So what happens on the edges, here, representative from the edge, will begin to happen at home. And so I think we are in the middle of that. I think it has already started. I think we are seeing warlike conditions in our own communities. There have been some that have been racked with that for a long time, and there's others who are now joining that bandwagon. Just last year, I had the opportunity to attend a city council meeting that we were having in my medium-sized town of Salem, Oregon, with a report that we were all anticipating about the rising gun violence in our city. This report was going to be an analysis of the how and the why and the who, and really get down to the specifics so we could understand what was happening. And so the presentation happened, and what we found out was it was happening all over the city, in larger parts in a certain quadrant of the city. Young people, so under the age of 21 and specifically under the age of 18, were at an increased risk of being both perpetrator and victim. All of those statistics paled in comparison when the director of the juvenile prison got up, and instead of giving statistics and facts, he presented a number of handwritten letters written by our teenagers who are in prison. Those letters said things like, I walk around my day and I do not feel safe. When I come home from school, I feel like I will be attacked and I don't know if I will live or die. I routinely have nightmares that wake me up in the middle of the night around my own death. I am hypervigilant. I am anxious. I perseverate on thoughts about violence. I feel like at any point it could break out. If we were to take these teenagers and stick them in a VA hospital and have them repeat the same symptoms, we would say, hello, combat veteran. It sounds like you have PTSD. We, the collective we, provide universal health care to many of our combat veterans, of which I am one. I have not paid 1 penny for health care in 10 years. Is there anyone else here this evening that has not paid 1 penny in health care costs in a decade? Not one person. Zero, zilch. Not a copay, not a mysterious building fee, nothing. Because we do, in fact, have universal health care. We know how to do it. We have the system for it, but we only offer it to those who will go to the edges of the empire and wage violence, whether it's justified or not. The war that I served in is considered illegal. So that part doesn't matter whether one is eligible for universal health care or not. But that is not a good enough justification. Every single person up here needs universal health care. Every single one of you need universal health care. The teenagers in my own hometown need universal health care. They need to be able to walk in and get the medical care and the mental health care. They need to have education. They need all of these things in order to thrive well. The logic that we would only give and provide universal health care to our combat veterans is flawed to the nth degree. Now, I'll go to the mat that our combat veterans absolutely need and deserve universal health care, but that is not the end of the story. It's an and. And so does every single other citizen in this country, I would argue the world. Because that is how we are healthy and that is how we are whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I never thought I would have such strange reactions to universal health care. And I wanted to ask you on that basis that because universal health care is such an important part of the military setup and establishment, how do you, and that is, it is a welfare system in a very strange way. How do you talk against war in that community which is benefiting from some kind of military welfare system? So how do you start talking about the violence of war in that system?
I think a lot of my colleagues in the military, both who are in now, but also who are out, understand this intuitively. So I served alongside folks, especially during my time in the Guard. What we would do is, just so you know, when you are on a Guard weekend, meaning you're 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. Does anyone remember those commercials? Okay. When you are serving in your 1 week a month or 2 weeks in the summer, or however long it might be, you are considered active duty and you have full health care. What we used to do was not go to the dentist in our civilian lives, wait until we got to our weekend where we finally would have access to a dentist. What began happening was, instead of it being a training weekend, it ended up being the dental weekend for 1,500 soldiers who didn't have access to it during the week or during the month. I hope you see how ridiculous this is. What the military did, because they have a mission, they have a purpose, was they created a health and a dental plan that Guard and Reserve could purchase. It was like $10 a month because they wanted everyone to go to the dentist not on training weekend. We collectively understand this problem. I served alongside folks like your story about, it was your story about the family who joined so they could get health care. I knew tons of those. There's no reason why our college being paid for should only be available to our veterans. Our young people are living extraordinary lives. They're doing what we have asked them to do. Be brave, be bold, learn, take advantage of your education. That is a noble endeavor that we don't need to withhold and only give it to those that we are willing to send to a war zone with the odds that they may not come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to turn to Dr. David Vine and give us some hope in terms of resistance. And I wanted to know about the resistances, because what is very clear is that there's a huge industrial military structure, and we are individuals. There's very little we can do, and that structure kind of reproduces itself in different parts of the world, in different war zones. It is able to do that, kind of create itself in different structures. And at the same time, what we heard from the panelists is the cost of that structure is the individual lives, the numbers that you talked about in so movingly. So where does it leave us individuals in terms of resisting that structure? So if you can talk about the way that we can turn that narrative. Thank you.
Sure. And I think, I'm guessing Seema and Kelly have thoughts about hope and resistance as well. So maybe I'll just briefly say, as individuals, I think, our best hope is banding together with other individuals, which means joining organizations that are resisting the forces of war and the military-industrial complex, like Veterans for Peace. And there are people who are not veterans who work with Veterans for Peace, as there are who work with About Face, Veterans Against the War, and other veterans groups. But of course, there are anti-war groups like Code Pink and many, many others. Again, I would turn to the movement, mostly of young people on college campuses, but not only, elsewhere as well, to end Israel's genocidal war in Gaza and beyond. They have been extraordinarily effective in getting attention and in looking at the financial underpinnings of the US-backed Israeli war, and in trying to force schools and other entities to divest from the US and Israeli war machine. One of the most exciting things for me has been the connections people are making between the economics of the Israeli war machine and the larger US military-industrial complex, that the war machine here is directly connected to the war machine there, and is directly connected to, for example, the fossil fuel industry, and thus to climate change and global warming and the fires we see in LA, or the climate change-fueled storms that hit places like Houston. So making those connections, and just to come back to the original question, as individuals, we can also pay attention to where our money is invested. I am embarrassed to say, as someone who's been working on these issues for 23 plus years, that I didn't look at some money that it was invested for me years ago when my godfather died. Some of it was invested in weapons manufacturers and the fossil fuel industry. I only realized this recently. That is embarrassing, and I'm guessing I'm not alone.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you can speak to hope. I've been searching for that in the past year. I think you've identified some really broad strategies, and I am going to go and look at the microcosm of individuals, that what we can do here is true solidarity. Meaningful allyship means protecting those that are vulnerable, that are on the edges of marginalized society. There's an article out today in The Intercept about HIV positive Gazans, that we have not considered an entire population that is living on the fringe of society. And protecting spaces like this. I spoke at Columbia University, and because I was speaking, I'm 4'11", by the way, that's why I wear these heels, on a topic that of Gaza, there was extra security in the building. So we need to start interrogating what conversations we're having and why, and whose narratives matter, and whose stories are getting told, and why. I lived through the Beirut blast. My daughter, who's in the audience tonight, was injured in that, and I served as her doctor at the same time as her mother. So it's not they out there to me. It's us. It's happening to people like me, and to my friends and to my colleagues. And so what we can do, imagine being a medical student. We live in the largest medical center in the world, and you're a third-year medical student. Your education has just come to a screeching halt. You have no internet, you have no power, and you are living under the threat of bombardment and have lost several of your mentors. In other circumstances, we would, as an incredibly generous country and state, open our medical schools, open our institutions, offer up, academic spaces, and that hasn't happened. I also want us to interrogate, you mentioned the college campuses and how that's been framed and shifted, and I really appreciate your narrative and how you've really dug under the underbelly to find out what they're actually saying instead of parsing out specific topics that are meant to ignite some sort of fear or radicalization in us. So I want us to interrogate ourselves and see whose stories are we spotlighting. I heard several love stories in Bosnia after the war. There are love stories of passion in Gaza, I promise you. There are people in love who have lost their lover and their passionate human being. And it should touch us just as much as those in Les Miserables in France. It should touch us just as much. And I want us to ask us, why do we not hear that?
Thank you. And what is hope and resistance for you?
Thank you. So, in my day job, I serve as the pastor of a Presbyterian church. It is a progressive Christian church. In our tradition, we have one of our giants of our scholarly tradition. His name is Walter Brueggemann, and he offered this to us, but I want to offer it to you, and I hope that maybe it translates across what might be our different religious traditions. And he was fond of saying, the imperial system and the empire wants to provide you the only reality that is possible on their terms. They want to describe it for you, tell the limits of it to you. And he said, the task of any prophetic voice, the task of any resistance movement begins with imagination. It begins with being able to imagine a different world than the one that the empire says is the only one that is possible. I imagine this evening that there are many of us in this room cut from a similar cloth. That might not be true, but I imagine that a number of folks here this evening came for similar reasons, to hear about David's important work, to hear about what are we going to do, how are we going to tackle the ways that our own health is tied up with our own militarism. As a pastor, I sat yesterday with a family who lost a loved one who died by suicide out of despair, and left a despairing note about how he just didn't see how anything was going to get better. And David might be right. It might get worse in the next few weeks or months or years. But I would suggest that the very first premise, the cornerstone of hope, is that we have to be able to hang on to our imaginations, not just wishful thinking, not just hand-wringing, not just, I hope someone somewhere will do something, but the kind of imagination that lives within each and every one of us, so that we have enough protected space to offer refuge to those around us who are sinking in despair. That, I think, is our first act, because that then can create a whole body that isn't torn apart, that isn't sinking under the weight of despair, because it's not that the imagination just lives in one or two or just in the leaders or just in the people with the loudest voices, but that it lives in a robust, living kind of way among all of the people.
Thank you very much. Can I steal a phrase that you used? Our own health is tied to our militarism. And that, I think, is the clear message that what we see outside, the militarism that your work talks about, is also connected to the healthcare system that we have, because money is siphoned off from the critical sector to what, $8 trillion? How many lives, how many public health systems can be built with that money? So that realization is the critical point of turning this narrative, that it affects our health, our systems of healthcare, and the militarism that we built there itself. David, I have a different question about the Americanism of your approach. And if I take a counter view, I would say that America is not the only country that is building those industrial military complexes. I come from India, which has also militarized itself and has a similar poor public health systems itself. So how do you see America in this kind of a global scenario where there are various other countries doing the same system? So is it wise to talk about America only to reduce the chances of war and militarism, or we take a more collective view?
Did you want to say something related to the past before I jump into that?
I can follow up.
Are you sure?
Yes, I want to follow
Okay.
the thread. I'll follow.
Clearly, the problems extend beyond the United States alone, and the military-industrial complex is an increasingly transnational problem and phenomenon. But we should be clear. The United States is the font of the problem. US military spending is probably around half of global military spending, meaning the rest of the world combined spends about as much as the United States government, US taxpayers spend on the military. The United States are the war profiteers, the weapons manufacturers in the United States, those located in the United States, sell more weapons than any others on earth. So we clearly need to look beyond the borders of the United States. There are other great purveyors of violence in this world in the forms of other war profiteers and elites. And when I talk about war profiteers, let me be clear. I'm talking about people who are benefiting financially, politically, and to some extent psychologically from war in a variety of ways. And Putin clearly is another war profiteer. He is benefiting from war, and others in Russia are, as in other countries. So, but I think especially as a US citizen, as someone who pays US taxes, I feel particularly responsible for the violence that my government, our government, has wreaked and is continuing to wreak.
Yes, and I was going to follow on what you were saying, Reverend, about hope. And in every conflict I have been in, the resounding message that people have asked for me to come back with, tell our stories. Tell our stories, please. Have them understand our humanity and that we are in a connected space, that we are interwoven. And that is all the way from Afghanistan through Gaza, through every other conflict. And so I just wanted to offer some hope in the way that we have gathered here tonight is in service of them. So I'm in gratitude that people are listening, because I have been screaming into the void for a very long time. And so it's so meaningful to have this space where people are actively listening, which otherwise has been, in my opinion, a staggering failure of humanity as we've seen it. So I just wanted to say I find my hope in the great thinkers from before me. I will quote Dr. Martin Luther King. He said that he who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. And the great James Baldwin is the victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. He or she has become a threat. And that is an invitation for every single person in this room to become a threat. If there is a conversation at work where you are witnessing dehumanization or sexism or misogyny or racism, disrupt it. Please chant. Thank you. Channel the rage that you hear in my voice, that I have, the things that we have all been subjected to on one level or another. I applied to medical school in a post 9/11 world and was asked at multiple cities whether my dad teaches me how to make bombs in our backyard, whether I would wear a burqa when I was a doctor. This is the world that we are living in, and it only happens because people are passive. And if we say, what did you mean by that? And I can't do it. I don't say, in polite conversation, I don't say genocide, actually. But my colleague here has stepped up and said that. That's showing up. Show up for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Reverend, any final words of hope from you for us to live and take forward at this moment?
I want to follow up on something David said and then return to David for the answer, because I'm going to identify the problem, but you're here for the solutions. You talked about wondering where your money was invested in, and about 2 years ago, a friend of mine offered to be my financial advisor, a decision that I know he deeply regrets. So I sat down with him And he said, well, how do you want to invest your money? And I had my list. I was like, well, here's what I don't want to invest in. And I started going down the list. Fossil fuels were on it, and weapons manufacturers were on it, and those who profited from war were on it. And so I finished my list, and he looked at me, and he said, there's nothing left. There's no place for you to invest your money in the US stock market. And so I stared at him, and he stared at me, and I said, well, what's the plan? And he's like, well, do you want to retire or not? And I was like, well, yes, I do, but not sacrificing my own children's future in which to do so. I was like, this system is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. So I can identify, like, the system is so all-encompassing in all the places in our lives. My financial advisor can't figure out how for me to have a 401k because I won't invest in any of these places. And every time I see him, I'm like, well, I've added someone else to the list. I've now added the tech CEOs to the list. And he's like, you might just have to bury it in the backyard and hope for the best. But I do think that the systems by which it happens for profit are the systems by which we have to tackle somehow. That's why I'm going to have David tell us the answer of how we tackle the for-profit side of the house and slow this roll. But the tentacles go everywhere. It's not just like a over here kind of problem. Please solve it.
Again, I do not have the answers, but building off the work of the network to dismantle the military-industrial complex and the many people I've been in conversation with and working with for a long time now, and again, for people looking for organizations, the network to dismantle the military-industrial complex, you can find us online. We also have a list of allies, very long list. It's going to be better organized soon. Our website is going to be relaunched soon. It's going to look much better, but let me come back to the populist anti-war movement. And again, this is needs to be a movement that connects with other movements. People are outraged by the kind of corruption that is endemic in our society. People look at Luigi Mangione. People got up in arms, almost literally, at the abuses and outrages of the healthcare system, of the health insurance companies that are fleecing all of us and profiting off of our ill health. And I think this is just one way in which the vast majority of people in the United States, and I think around the world, are on our side. They understand that the system is corrupt. They understand that we are being ripped off. They understand that it is the weapons manufacturers, the war profiteers, but it's other corporations. It is the corporate capture of the system that is the United States, and that's what we need to struggle against with other people.
Thank you very much. We have time for some questions. Do you have any cards? There's some cards. I think we have time for one question. So I'll read out the one that I've got here, which is quite a long question. I hope there's a question at the end. In our violent, militarized society, the assassination of the United States healthcare CEO captured the public attention and sympathy. Despite the attempts of the legacy media to distract, people are angry about our murderous healthcare system. How can this energy be channeled into a productive struggle against the status quo? So there's more, but I think we get the point. So Since you started talking about the health insurance system, can you start and then David can end?
Well, I just moved. I know. I'm
very much part
I'm
of the
very much
system.
part of the system. I actually also just moved back from Europe, where I also didn't pay a dime into the. I recall getting my medications and my daughter's medications and submitting my residency card. And by the time I did pay something out of pocket. By the time I had returned home and I walked from the pharmacy to my home, that money had been now deposited into my bank account. So I actually didn't pay anything. What we are seeing, and why I choose to work in Texas, is because we are sitting in a state that has the highest number of uninsured, that is suffering from gerrymandering to high hell. It's suffering from people who want to change and are up against an incredibly difficult system. And I have colleagues in the room who have worked here for years, and this is the place where change happens. I have worked in Washington, D.C. I have worked in other places. But if you want to roll up your sleeves and actually do the hard work of taking on insurance companies, taking on state-level government, it is in places like Texas and Georgia and Louisiana. And that's why I choose to come back every single time, because we are up against a mountain of power. And my hat's off to everyone who works and lives in this sort of purple dot in a red sea of red, because this is where change is happening, and it's really in your hands.
So please roll up your sleeves and take on. We are right here in Houston. There's no better place to start the movement.
Really, I mean, people in D.C. and New York will talk a lot at cocktail parties and give a lot of money, and I'm very grateful for that money. But we are in the places where we're doing this work. Everyone in this room and so invest in your local communities, local radio, all of that.
And if I can just say, the project that I run is called Health is Politics, which is basically that healthcare is a political question, and how we constantly reignite the political question that drives healthcare is what we are trying to do. It's a platform for anyone to come and talk, so please feel free to. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David, your answer to your answer to the question?
Oh, no, Kelly, you should.
Kelly, yes, please.
Well, I just came from Oregon, where the nurses and the doctors are on strike at the moment. So
Against the
yes,
insurance?
yeah, 5,000 of them are on strike. I think it's day 5. But if I were here in Texas, I'd sign up to follow Dr. Seema's social media and find out what she's doing.
Should we try to squeeze in some more questions?
Okay, I have a question for Dr. David Vine. You have so eloquently spoken, of the power and control of the military-industrial complex in the US, shown how the monetary profiteering is the most important underlying factor. How do you suggest we move the ideal of profiteering to the ideal of serving humanity? That's an important question, to change that discourse.
I mean, in a way, of course, that's what Dr. King was calling for, a shift in our society from a society revolving around racism, capitalism, and militarism to one focused on care and the uplift of human lives. He talked about, the suction tube of money that was being stolen. He didn't use the word stolen or theft like Eisenhower, but he used the phrase suction tube of the money that was being taken from the poor. I mean, that's the challenge in front of us. And I think we need to roll up our sleeves and fight like hell in any and every way we can, because, to quote one of my colleagues, people are dying. Mm-hmm. And for those of us lucky enough to not be dying, and I don't assume that about everyone in this room, because people are carrying a lot with them and surely have been touched by war and illness. and much more. But for those of us who have the privilege to have a little room in our lives to, whether it's, challenging someone using, again, King's word, breaking silence in a work, setting, or helping to divest at the institution you're a part of. Could be a church, could be a school. Anything and everything we can do is what we need to do.
On that point, I just wanted to thank all of you in joining us in this discussion, and for you to come and listen to us and engage with this. When I was coming to this event, I didn't know what to expect, and I was thinking it will be about this huge burden that we are carrying in ourselves and outside, about war and death and militarism. But I am hugely encouraged to not only have fellow panelists who think alike in different ways in different parts of the country, but also truly a gathering which is thinking about hope, peace going forward, and of resistance. And on that note, I thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Johnson. I'm the program director here at the Rothko Chapel. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight in our January rainy weather. This is where the conversation ends tonight, but we will stay in conversation with you, with these folks, and we'd love to continue the conversation for now outside across the street at our Welcome House. We'll have a book signing. You'll be able to purchase David's book, as well as some refreshments out there. I'm going to ask all of our panelists, let's give them one more round of applause. Mutual gratitude tonight. I'm going to ask our panelists to go ahead and exit, and I'll share just a little bit more information with y'all. We'd love to see you back at the chapel. We're now open Tuesday through Sunday at 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. As well, I'll invite you back for MLK Day on Monday. We're going to be playing different selections of Dr. King's speeches throughout the years here in the chapel at 11, 1, 3, and 4. So check our website for the selections and come back and listen. And otherwise, we'll see you outside. Have a great night, and we'll see you back at the chapel again soon. Thank you.